What do you think you're doing? The manager shouted. Julia stood motionless, still holding the tray of food in front of the dust-covered child. You're fired. 3 words, cold as ice. That night as she packed her belongings from the cafeteria, her phone rang. A man's voice. I'm calling from the Oval Office. Who was that child? And what would make the president himself call her? Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Julia Monroe had worked in the Lincoln Springs Elementary School cafeteria for 8 years. At 41, the widow and single mother had built a quiet life centered around her teenage son and the hundreds of children she fed each day. Her position as assistant cook wasn't glamorous, but it provided stability and health insurance, 2 necessities for raising a child alone. In the school's bustling kitchen, Julia was known for her reliability. Not once in 8 years had she been late. Not once had she called in sick without genuine cause. Her colleagues appreciated her steady nature, though Miss Harper, the cafeteria manager, seemed perpetually unimpressed by Julia's dedication. Rules exist for a reason, was Mrs. Harper's favorite phrase, delivered with pursed lips and a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. The rules dictated everything: portion sizes, serving temperatures, and most strictly, who received meals. No lunch ticket, no food, no exceptions. On Tuesday, just after the lunch rush had subsided, Julia noticed a small figure lingering near the kitchen entrance. A second-grade boy named Max stood half-hidden behind the doorframe, his face smudged with dirt, hands trembling slightly. Julia recognized him immediately. He'd been avoiding lunchtime for weeks. She had overheard teachers discussing his situation. A single mother, recently ill, paperwork for subsidized lunches, incomplete after moving from another district. Julia glanced around. Mrs. Harper was in the office counting inventory. The other staff were cleaning up. The boy's eyes followed her movements, not begging, just watching with the quiet resignation no 8-year-old should possess. Making a swift decision, Julia took a leftover pasta tray, one that would otherwise be discarded, and placed it on a small table near the kitchen. Come sit down, she said softly. Eat. Max approached cautiously, as if expecting the offer to be withdrawn. When he finally sat, he didn't immediately eat, instead staring at the food with disbelief. It's okay, Julia reassured him. It's for you. Just as Max lifted his fork, Mrs. Harper emerged from the office. She stopped abruptly, eyes darting from the boy to Julia to the food tray. What do you think you're doing? She demanded, voice rising sharply. Julia straightened her spine. He's hungry, Margaret. He hasn't eaten since breakfast. Maybe not even then. You know the rules. No ticket. No meal. Mrs. Harper's voice dropped to a hiss. You can't just give away food whenever you feel like it. It's leftover pasta that would be thrown out anyway. Julia replied, keeping her voice level to avoid frightening Max. That's not the point, Mrs. Harper snapped. There are procedures, paperwork. This, she gestured at the eating child, is completely unauthorized. Julia remained beside Max. He's a child. He's hungry. Everything else is just details. Mrs. Harper's face tightened. I'm reporting this to administration, immediately. 2 hours later, Julia was called to the principal's office. The termination notice was already printed, the decision apparently made before she even sat down. The stated reason: violation of food service protocols, unauthorized distribution of unaccounted food items. Principal Benson avoided eye contact as he explained that district policy was clear. We have procedures for children in need. Proper channels. What you did, while well-intentioned, circumvented important safeguards. Julia listened silently, her hands folded in her lap. She had expected this outcome from the moment Mrs. Harper caught her, yet somehow the official termination, ending 8 years of service in 10 brisk minutes, felt surreal. Do you have anything to say, Mrs. Monroe? Principal Benson finally asked. Julia considered her option. Fighting would be futile. A lengthy explanation wouldn't change the outcome. In the end, she opted for simplicity. I'd do it again, she said quietly. 20 minutes later, Julia walked out of Lincoln Springs Elementary carrying a small box of personal items. Her security badge had been deactivated. Her final paycheck would arrive by mail. 8 years ended over a single plate of pasta. As she approached her car, a small figure darted out from behind the playground equipment. Max stood on the sidewalk, raising his hand in a timid way. In his other hand, a napkin stained with pasta sauce. Julia smiled and waved back, her job gone, but her conscience clear. Sometimes one decision can change an entire lineage. Are you ready? By evening, Julia's dismissal had become the primary topic of conversation in her apartment complex. Her next-door neighbor, Diane, brought lasagna and outrage in equal portions. "It's absolutely ridiculous," Diane fumed, setting the casserole dish on Julia's kitchen counter. "Firing someone for feeding a hungry child. What kind of world are we living in?" Julia appreciated the support, but remained practical. "I broke the rules. They had grounds. Rules that prevent children from eating shouldn't exist in the first place," Diane countered. While Julia's son Eli reheated the lasagna, she explained what she'd learned about Max's situation. His mother, Carla Reed, had moved to their district 3 months ago after losing her previous apartment. Shortly after arriving, she'd been diagnosed with an aggressive form of pneumonia, resulting in hospitalization and unpaid leave from her new job. The combination of medical bills, lost income and relocation had created a perfect storm of hardship. The school lunch subsidy paperwork got lost in the shuffle, Julia explained. Without approved documentation, Max doesn't qualify for free meals, regardless of their actual situation. "Can't you call someone? Explain the situation," Eli suggested, his teenage indignation and injustice evident in his voice. Julia shook her head. "I tried reaching out to the district social worker. She warned me that further interference could result in legal action for accessing student information without authorization, since I'm no longer an employee." The following morning, Julia began the uncomfortable task of job hunting. At 41, with experience primarily in school food service, her options seemed limited. Still, bills wouldn't pay themselves. Eli's college fund wouldn't grow on its own. As she updated her resume, her phone buzzed with notifications. The local parent Facebook group had erupted over. Someone, Julia suspected a kitchen staff member, had shared a brief video clip of the incident. The grainy footage from the cafeteria security camera showed Julia placing the food tray before Max, the confrontation with Miss Harper, and finally the boy eating quickly while casting nervous glances at the adults arguing nearby. Max's face was clearly visible in the footage, thin, exhausted, but with eyes that brightened visibly at the sight of food. The video ended with Miss Harper pointing toward the office, while Julia stood protectively beside the child's table. Comments beneath the post were sharply divided. "How can they fire someone for basic human decency? Rules exist for health and safety. What if the child had allergies? I've known Julia for years. She was the kindest person in that cafeteria. If we start breaking rules because of feelings, where does it end?" Julia closed the app, uncomfortable with being the center of a community controversy. Her priority now was finding employment, not becoming a social media cause celeb. That afternoon, while submitting online applications, Julia received an unusual delivery, a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Someone is watching this story from very far away." Below the cryptic text was something even more puzzling. A photograph of a hand wearing what appeared to be a presidential ring, resting on a tablet screen, displaying the cafeteria video. Julia stared at the image, trying to process its implications. Was this an elaborate prank, a bizarre threat? She showed the letter to Eli when he returned from school. "Mom," he said slowly, examining the photograph, "I think that's the actual presidential seal on that ring." "That's ridiculous," Julia replied, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Why would anyone at that level care about a cafeteria worker in Pennsylvania? The question lingered unanswered. As evening arrived, Julia focused on practical matters, preparing dinner, helping Eli with homework, folding laundry. The letter was likely someone's idea of a joke, she decided, not worth dwelling on. At 9:17 p.m., while boxing up the last of her cafeteria belongings, Julia's phone rang. The caller ID displayed unknown number. Normally she would let such calls go to voicemail, assuming telemarketers or scammers. Something, perhaps the lingering mystery of the letter, compelled her to answer. "Hello. Good evening. Is this Julia Monroe?" A professionally polite male voice inquired. "Yes, this is." "Please hold for a moment. Someone would like to speak with you." Before Julia could respond, the line clicked. A few seconds of silence followed, then a new voice, deeper, warmer, instantly recognizable to any American. "Mrs. Monroe, this is the president. I wanted to personally thank you." Julia sank onto a kitchen chair, her free hand gripping the edge of the table. I'm sorry, is this some kind of joke? The voice chuckled. No joke, Mrs. Monroe. I saw the video of what happened at Lincoln Springs Elementary today. My daughter showed it to action. She was quite moved by your actions. Mr. Commander-in-Chief, Julia managed her voice barely above a whisper. I just gave a hungry child some leftover pasta. What you did represents the best of America, the president replied. Compassion over bureaucracy, humanity over paperwork. I've been trying to get a school lunch bill through Congress for months now, and your story might be exactly what we needed to highlight the real-world impact of these policies. Julia struggled to formulate a coherent response. I lost my job. Yes. And that's part of what I'd like to discuss with you. My staff will be in touch tomorrow morning. Would you be willing to visit Washington next week with a young boy and his mother as well if they're comfortable with that? Of course, Julia answered automatically, still processing the surreality of the situation. Excellent. And Mrs. Monroe, what you did matters. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest waves of change. After the call ended, Julia sat motionless in her kitchen, the phone still clutched in her hand. Outside her window, the quiet Pennsylvania suburb continued its normal evening routine, unaware that its ordinary cafeteria worker had just been thrust into an extraordinary national conversation. I don't know about you, but this part really hit me. Type respect if it moved you too. Julia woke to her phone ringing at 6:32 a.m. The local news wanted a statement. So did the state newspaper and a national morning show. Overnight, the cafeteria video had exploded across social media platforms, accumulating millions of views, and spawning the hashtag number feed with dignity. By 7:15 a.m., 2 news vans were parked outside her apartment building. Julia kept the blinds drawn, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Eli, initially excited by the development, now seemed concerned as he peered through the curtains. Mom, there are like 20 people down there with cameras. At 8 a.m., precisely as the president had promised, Julia received another call from Washington. This time it was the chief of staff explaining that a car would arrive at noon to take her to a local TV affiliate for a remote interview with ABC's morning show. Following that, arrangements had been made for her, Max and his mother to fly to Washington the next day, all expenses covered. The president believes your story perfectly illustrates why our school lunch legislation is so crucial, the chief of staff explained. With your permission, he'd like you to stand beside him when he announces a new executive order addressing emergency nutrition in schools. Julia agreed, still struggling to comprehend how feeding one child had cascaded into national policy discussions. At 9:30 a.m., Julia received an unexpected visitor. Carla Reed, Max's mother, stood at her door, eyes red-rimmed but determined. I had to thank you in person, she said when Julia invited her in. Max told me what happened, and then I saw the video this morning. Her voice broke. You're the first person who's helped us since we moved here. Carla explained that her pneumonia had developed complications, resulting in unpaid medical leave that stretched her already tenuous finances to breaking point. The school lunch paperwork was just one of many administrative casualties, as she struggled to keep herself and Max afloat. I was too proud to ask for help, she admitted, and too exhausted to figure out all the systems. By 10 a.m., the story had reached Lincoln Springs Elementary. Students arrived to find a line of protesters stretching along the sidewalk outside. Parents, community members and even students from nearby schools, carrying hastily made signs. Don't fire kindness. Hunger has no paperwork. Kids need food, not rules. Inside the school, chaos reigned. The phone lines were jammed with calls from parents and media outlets. Miss Harper had called in sick after receiving threatening messages on her personal social media accounts. Principal Benson was locked in emergency meetings with the district superintendent and board members. The pressure was mounting from all directions. Local businesses began calling, offering Julia jobs with significantly higher salaries than her position. 3 GoFundMe campaigns had spontaneously appeared, raising thousands of dollars for both Julia and Max's family. Television producers were reaching out with interview requests and talk show appearances. Eli watched the unfolding situation with a mixture of pride and concern. Mom, I've never seen anything go viral like this before. It's like the whole world is suddenly paying attention. Not the whole world, Julia corrected gently, just a small corner of it that needed reminding about what matters. At 11:45 a.m., Julia received yet another call, this time from Principal Benson himself. Mrs. Monroe, he began,
His voice, the district board has asked me to offer you your position back, with a formal apology and, a promotion to head cafeteria manager. Julia noted the irony. And Mrs. Harper, she has decided to take early retirement. Principal Benson replied diplomatically. I appreciate the offer, Julia said, but I'll need some time to consider it. By noon, the education secretary had issued a statement. No school employee should ever face termination for ensuring a child doesn't go hungry. The Department of Education is reviewing federal guidelines regarding emergency nutrition provisions in public schools. The car promised by the chief of staff arrived precisely on time, a black SUV with tinted windows, and a driver who introduced himself only as Steve from the Executive Mansion Transportation Office. Julia was whisked to the local ABC affiliate studio, where she participated in a 7-minute interview that was broadcast nationally. When asked why she had risked her job for one meal, Julia's response was simple. It wasn't a calculation. When you see a hungry child, you feed. Everything else is secondary. The interview concluded with breaking news. The president would be addressing the nation tomorrow regarding a new school lunch initiative with Julia Munro as his special guest. Social media exploded with reactions. Celebrities tweeted their support. Politicians from both parties scrambled to position themselves on the right side of the suddenly prominent school hunger issue. Corporate brands announced donations to child hunger organizations. And through it all, Julia maintained her composure, focusing on the actual humans at the center of the whirlwind. Max and Carla, who would be accompanying her to Washington. The following day unfolded like a dream. A private government jet, a motorcade from Andrews Air Force Base to the Executive Mansion, a brief but surreal tour of the historic building, then a meeting in the Oval Office with the president himself. Mrs. Hara, he said, rising from behind his desk to greet her with a warm handshake. It's an honor to meet you in person. Julia, Carla, and Max were invited to sit on the famous couches where world leaders regularly conducted diplomacy. The president joined them, speaking not as the most powerful person in the world, but as someone genuinely concerned about their story. A nation is shaped by people like you, he told Julia, not by policies or politicians, people who see a need and simply meet it regardless of consequences. To Max, he spoke with grandfatherly kindness. You're a very important young man. Your story is helping us make sure other kids don't have to be hungry at school. After their private meeting, they moved to the Rose Garden, where press and invited guests had gathered. The president announced a new executive order requiring all public schools to implement no questions asked emergency meal protocols for any child who appeared in need, regardless of paperwork status. This order, which I'm calling the Julia Munro provision, ensures that no child will be denied food while adults sort out the administrative details, he explained to applause. Then came the moment that would be replayed on news programs for days to come. The president presented Julia with the Commander-in-Chief Citizen's Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in the nation, and the first ever bestowed upon a school cafeteria worker for exemplifying the best of American values and reminding us all that compassion should never be sacrificed to procedure. The citation read, when invited to say a few words, Julia approached the microphone with visible nervousness. I never imagined a plate of pasta would bring me here, she began, earning gentle laughter from the audience. I just did what any parent would want someone to do for their child. If my son were hungry and someone fed him, I'd be grateful for the rest of my life. The assembled crowd rose in a standing ovation. Carla embraced Julia, tears streaming down her face. You didn't just feed my son, she whispered. You saved us both. As cameras flashed and journalists clamored for statements, Julia caught sight of Max standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching the proceedings with solemn eyes. In that moment, amid all the pomp and presidential power, Julia was reminded why any of this mattered in the first place. Not for medals or media attention, but for children like him, children who deserve to be seen, fed and valued. Later that evening, after returning to their hotel, Julia received one final call from the Executive Mansion. The president's education advisor outlined a new position created specifically for her, special advisor to the federal school nutrition program. The role would allow Julia to help shape policies, ensuring no child faced the situation that Max had experienced. We need people with practical experience and moral clarity, the advisor explained. People who understand that systems exist to serve people, not the other way around. Julia promised to consider the offer, though in her heart she already knew her answer. Some calls, like the one to feed a hungry child regardless of rules, answered themselves. What moment in your life did justice arrive late but still taste sweet? 6 months later, Julia walked through the Lincoln Springs Elementary cafeteria during lunch period, observing the implementation of the program she had helped design. As special advisor to the federal school nutrition program, she divided her time between Washington policy meetings and ground-level visits to schools nationwide. The Julia Monroe provision had been formally codified into federal law, ensuring that every public school maintained an emergency meal protocol for children in need. The legislation had passed with rare bipartisan support, a brief moment of unity in an otherwise divided political landscape. Lincoln Springs Elementary had transformed its cafeteria operations. A new no-questions-asked system allowed any child to receive a meal with administrative details handled discreetly afterward. Mr. Harper, replacement, a former restaurant chef, with 6 children of his own, had implemented a community table concept where leftover food was made available rather than discarded. But Julia's proudest achievement wasn't in Washington or even in policy documents. It was embodied in Max Wilson, now properly enrolled in the free lunch program, who no longer hid in doorways or went hungry during school hours. Max's mother Carla had recovered from her illness and found employment as a parent liaison for the very program Julia had helped create. The most visible symbol of the change stood on the cafeteria wall, a colorful mural painted by Edison's 5th grade art class. It depicted Julia offering a tray of food to a small child with the words "Kindness feeds, more than hunger" emblazoned below. During a school assembly, a 3rd grader read an essay that had won the district writing contest. "Mrs. Julia didn't just feed my friend, she taught our whole school what's right." When local reporters asked Julia how it felt to return to the place where she'd been fired, her response became something of a personal motto: "If it's wrong to feed a hungry child, then I'm willing to be wrong every time." Each morning, before heading to meetings or school visits, Julia still volunteered at a local shelter's breakfast program. When asked why she maintained this routine despite her demanding schedule, she explained simply, "We don't need to do extraordinary things, we just need to not look away when ordinary needs present themselves." On the anniversary of the cafeteria incident, Julia received a handmade card from Max. Inside, alongside a childish drawing of the executive mansion, he had written, "Thank you for the pasta. It changed everything." Julia kept the card on her desk in Washington, a reminder that transformation often begins with the smallest acts of human kindness. A single meal offered with dignity can indeed change a life, a community, perhaps even a nation. Julia sat that night beneath the soft kitchen light, staring at the card Max had given her, simple crayon lines, a crooked smile and the words, "Thank you for the pasta." It wasn't just a drawing. It was a testament that one moment of quiet courage could shatter indifference and build something enduring. She hadn't fed just one child, she'd nourished a national conscience. Even one small act of kindness can change a bad day, a life, and sometimes the entire world. Share an act of kindness you received that you'll never forget. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, where kindness spreads every day. Remember, hitting like isn't just for the video, but for the truly worthy people in life. We told their story, you gave it meaning. Thank you.